The Middle Ages are often depicted as a time of strict morality, religious dominance, and repression. However, medieval sexuality was far more complex and multifaceted than the stereotypical image of a prudish, devout era. Behind the imposing walls of castles, within the secluded corridors of monasteries, and in the humble dwellings of peasants, human desire expressed itself in myriad ways, often both in accordance with and in defiance of prevailing religious and social norms. In this video, we will explore the hidden world of medieval sexuality, the taboo, the erotic, and the forbidden. We will examine how religious doctrines, legal constraints, and cultural practices intertwined to create a unique tapestry of sexual expression. From the celebrated rituals of courtly love to the clandestine activities in back alley brothels, our journey will reveal how sexuality influenced every stratum of medieval society. Prepare to uncover the secrets behind the closed doors of the past and to understand how these legacies continue to influence modern perceptions of love and desire. Medieval views on sexuality. In the Middle Ages, the Catholic Church held unrivaled power over the moral and social life of European society. Its teachings on sexuality were based on the idea that sex was primarily a tool for procreation, to be practiced only within the bounds of a sanctioned marital relationship. Influential theologians such as Saint Augustine and Saint Thomas Aquinas argued that while sexual relations were necessary to ensure the survival of the human race, they should be devoid of excessive pleasure and strictly regulated. Confession manuals from the period enumerated a vast array of sexual sins: masturbation, adultery, fornication, sodomy, and even the secret indulgence of thoughts or glances deemed lustful. Each sin had prescribed penances, and even minor transgressions could lead to a lifetime of guilt and public shaming. Yet, even as the Church decried these practices, the reality on the ground was much more nuanced. While public behavior was monitored closely, private life often told a different story. Religious edicts coexisted with a vibrant undercurrent of desire that frequently flouted official teachings. Interestingly, the Church's stance was not uniform across all regions. In parts of Europe under Muslim or Eastern Orthodox influence, for example, sexual mores could be more lenient. Even within Christian Europe, attitudes sometimes shifted over time or varied by locale, influenced by local customs and the pragmatic needs of governing a diverse populace. Legal codes during the Middle Ages were closely interwoven with religious doctrine. Laws against adultery, fornication, and sodomy were enforced rigorously. Penalties could range from public humiliation and fines to imprisonment and, in severe cases, execution. However, enforcement was inconsistent and often reflected one's social status. Commoners might receive a fine or a public reprimand, whereas nobles and clergy, though expected to uphold higher moral standards, often faced harsher scrutiny when accused of sexual transgressions. Courtly love and romantic idealism. One of the most celebrated, and often misunderstood, aspects of medieval sexuality is the tradition of courtly love. Flourishing during the High Middle Ages, especially in the courts of France and England, courtly love was a highly ritualized form of romance. It typically involved chaste, unconsummated relationships between knights and noblewomen who were usually already married. The relationships were defined by a series of formalities: secret meetings, the exchange of poems and gifts, and the idolization of the beloved from a distance. At its core, courtly love was paradoxical. On one hand, it celebrated an intense, almost spiritual form of attraction that could elevate the soul. On the other, it strictly forbade the physical consummation of that love. This chaste passion was seen as noble, a way for individuals to experience the heights of emotion while still conforming to societal expectations. The ideals of courtly love, immortalized in the works of poets and troubadours such as Chrétien de Troyes, became a lasting cultural force that influenced literature and art well beyond the medieval period. Troubadours, the itinerant poet-musicians of medieval Europe, were instrumental in spreading the ideals of courtly love. Traveling from court to court, they composed and performed songs that celebrated the beauty of forbidden love. Their lyrics often depicted the agony of unrequited passion, the thrill of secret meetings, and the bittersweet nature of longing. Marriage, adultery, and infidelity. In medieval society, marriage was rarely about romantic love. Instead, it was an economic and political arrangement, designed to secure alliances, consolidate wealth, and strengthen family ties. Noble families would often arrange marriages for their children at a very young age, with little regard for personal compatibility. The primary purpose of marriage was procreation, to produce legitimate heirs and secure the family lineage. Within these arranged unions, sexual relations were typically viewed as a duty rather than a source of pleasure. The Church even prescribed periods of sexual abstinence, particularly on holy days and during certain liturgical seasons. Some couples, influenced by the ideals of religious piety, would even opt for chaste marriages, in which physical intimacy was minimized in favor of spiritual connection. Despite the structured nature of arranged marriages, infidelity was not uncommon in medieval society. Noblemen, in particular, were known for maintaining mistresses and engaging in extramarital liaisons. While the consequences for adultery varied considerably depending on social standing, women caught in extramarital affairs often faced far harsher repercussions. Public shaming, physical punishment, and even execution were common penalties for women, whereas men frequently escaped with only a fine or a slap on the wrist. Prostitution and the medieval sex trade. Prostitution in the Middle Ages presents one of the more intriguing paradoxes of the era. Officially condemned by the Church, prostitution was nonetheless tolerated, and in many cases, regulated, by secular authorities. Cities such as London, Paris, and Venice established designated districts where brothels were permitted to operate. These areas, sometimes referred to as red light districts, were subject to municipal oversight, including taxation and health inspections. For many women, prostitution was a means of economic survival in a world with few opportunities. The spectrum of women in the trade ranged from impoverished laborers to sophisticated courtesans who moved comfortably within elite circles. Brothels not only served as centers for sexual commerce but also played a role in the local economy, contributing revenue to city treasuries and influencing urban politics. The official stance of the Church was one of denunciation when it came to prostitution. Yet, in practice, many clergy members frequented brothels, and some high-ranking church officials were rumored to maintain concubines. This hypocrisy highlighted a significant disconnect between the Church's moral pronouncements and the realities of daily life. While the Church publicly decried the sinfulness of prostitution, its tacit acceptance, or even participation, in the practice reflected a pragmatic approach to managing human sexuality. Forbidden desires and sexual taboos. Homosexuality in medieval Europe remains a subject shrouded in both myth and ambiguity. Although Christian doctrine explicitly condemned homosexual acts, historical records suggest that same-sex relationships were more common than once believed. In many cases, these relationships were veiled in layers of euphemism and coded language, making them difficult to document with certainty. In some monastic communities, close bonds between male monks have been interpreted by modern scholars as having romantic or erotic undertones. Although such relationships were rarely acknowledged openly due to severe moral and legal prohibitions, subtle references in letters, art, and legal documents hint at the existence of same-sex affection. In certain cosmopolitan centers, particularly those engaged in trade and cultural exchange, attitudes toward homosexual relationships could be more tolerant, even if only in private. Beyond the conventional spectrum of sexual behavior, medieval society also saw the emergence of a range of unconventional practices. Court records, confession narratives, and even satirical literature provide glimpses into behaviors that modern audiences might classify as kinky or fetishistic. There are documented cases of role-playing, erotic rituals, and early forms of what today might be considered BDSM. These practices, however, were kept under wraps, hidden away from the public eye and practiced in secret circles. Sex and religion. The struggles of the clergy. The vow of celibacy imposed on priests, monks, and nuns was meant to ensure a life dedicated entirely to spiritual pursuits. However, the enforcement of this vow was fraught with difficulty. Temptation was a constant challenge, and numerous scandals involving members of the clergy are recorded in historical documents. Despite their public pronouncements of purity and devotion, many clergy members engaged in clandestine sexual relationships, and some even fathered children. These episodes of clerical misconduct not only tarnished the reputation of the church but also sowed seeds of discontent among the faithful. Rumors of secret liaisons, particularly in prominent monasteries and convents, fueled calls for reform. Some reform-minded preachers used these scandals as evidence that the church's stringent regulations were both hypocritical and counterproductive, a view that would eventually contribute to the currents of the Reformation in the following centuries. By the later Middle Ages, a new and horrifying phenomenon began to take shape: the witch hunts. These were not merely efforts to root out heresy. They were also driven by deep-seated anxieties about uncontrolled sexuality and the subversion of traditional gender roles. Women, in particular, became the primary targets of these witch hunts, accused of engaging in lascivious acts with demonic entities or consorting with the devil himself. Accusations of sexual immorality were often intertwined with charges of witchcraft. Trials were marked by forced confessions, brutal interrogations, and, ultimately, execution. These tragic events highlight how fears over sexual deviance could be manipulated to control and oppress entire segments of the population, particularly vulnerable women who dared to step outside the rigid confines of acceptable behavior. Sexual rituals and pagan influences. Long before the advent of Christianity, European societies engaged in elaborate rituals designed to ensure fertility, prosperity, and the continuity of life. These pre-Christian traditions often celebrated the natural cycles of birth, growth, decay, and renewal. Seasonal festivals, marked by music, dance, and even explicit sexual activity, were thought to invoke the blessings of nature and the deities associated with fertility. Such rites were integral to the communal life of ancient peoples. They provided not only a way to mark the passage of time but also an opportunity to express the primal, instinctual aspects of human desire. Even as Christianity spread across Europe, many of these rituals did not vanish entirely. Instead, they were absorbed, reinterpreted, or rebranded as part of the new religious framework, a process that allowed vestiges of ancient fertility rites to persist well into the medieval period. The transition from paganism to Christianity was not abrupt. It was marked by a gradual process of syncretism, in which elements of older traditions were integrated into the Christian worldview. Festivals such as Easter and Christmas, for example, retain echoes of ancient fertility celebrations. Symbols like the egg, the lamb, and even the concept of rebirth were reinterpreted to align with Christian theology, while still resonating with older, pre-Christian sensibilities. Medieval erotica and literature. Erotic literature and art were very much part of medieval culture, even if they were often circulated in secret. Illuminated manuscripts, carvings on church columns, and marginalia in religious texts occasionally reveal overtly sensual themes. One of the most famous examples is the Roman de la Rose, an allegorical poem that blends courtly love with explicit erotic imagery. Although sometimes dismissed as mere titillation, these works provide invaluable insights into the undercurrents of desire that permeated medieval society. The imagery used in these works, lush gardens, intertwined lovers, and symbolic representations of fertility, was rich with meaning. Artists and writers used these symbols to explore themes of passion, temptation, and the eternal conflict between spiritual asceticism and bodily pleasure. These expressions of eroticism were not simply about titillation. They served as a commentary on the complexities of human nature and the eternal struggle between reason and desire. These satirical works served as an important counterbalance to the official narratives of sexual repression. By lampooning the absurdities of the time, they provided the audience with a release valve for the tensions created by strict moral and social restrictions. In doing so, they not only entertained but also subtly critiqued the establishment, revealing a latent desire for more open and honest expressions of human sexuality. Gender roles and sexuality. The role of women in medieval sexuality is a study in contrasts. On one hand, the dominant social and religious narratives dictated that women should be chaste, obedient, and modest. On the other hand, numerous historical accounts suggest that women found ways to assert agency over their own sexual desires. Whether through secret letters, participation in the coded rituals of courtly love, or even through their involvement in local festivals celebrating fertility, medieval women often exercised a surprising degree of autonomy in matters of the heart. Noble women, in particular, could navigate the constraints of their environment by using the language of courtly love to express affection and desire in a socially acceptable manner. Even among the lower classes, where options were more limited, women sometimes defied the strictures imposed upon them, if only in small, subversive ways, to pursue personal happiness and intimacy. For medieval men, expressions of sexuality were frequently intertwined with notions of honor, virility, and social status. The ideal of the knight was not only one of martial valor but also of romantic bravery. Tales of heroic conquests on the battlefield were paralleled by narratives of amorous adventures, where seduction and the pursuit of forbidden pleasures became marks of masculine prowess. The impact of the Black Death on sexual norms. The mid-14th century brought with it the catastrophic Black Death, a pandemic that decimated large portions of Europe's population and reshaped every aspect of society. In a world where death was an ever-present reality, the strict prohibitions surrounding sexual pleasure began to loosen. The constant presence of mortality forced many to re-evaluate long-held taboos and to seize moments of joy and passion before life's inevitable end. Historical chronicles recount scenes of revelry and hedonism in the wake of the plague. People, confronted with the fragility of existence, increasingly embraced the pleasures of the flesh as a defiant affirmation of life. This shift in attitudes, rooted in both despair and liberation, challenged the established norms of sexual behavior and paved the way for a more open expression of desire in later centuries. The cultural impact of the Black Death extended beyond mere survival. It instilled in many a carpe diem mentality, a belief in the urgency of enjoying life's pleasures while one still could. Sermons that once denounced earthly pleasures began to acknowledge the transient nature of life, and artistic works from this period often celebrate the fleeting beauty of human passion. This renewed emphasis on the present moment helped to erode some of the long-held prohibitions on sexual expression, setting the stage for the more liberal attitudes that would emerge during the Renaissance. The legacy of medieval sexuality. As Europe transitioned from the Middle Ages into the Renaissance, many of the complex attitudes toward sexuality developed during the medieval period found new expression. Renaissance artists, writers, and philosophers drew upon the rich tapestry of medieval erotic imagery, reinterpreting and expanding it in ways that celebrated the beauty of the human form and the intricacies of love. The explicit depictions of sensuality in art and literature, combined with a revived interest in classical antiquity, helped to usher in an era where sexual expression became both more open and more sophisticated. The legacy of medieval sexuality is visible not only in the explicit artworks of the Renaissance but also in the continued fascination with courtly love and the romantic ideal. The tensions between public morality and private desire, so palpable during the Middle Ages, remained a central theme in European culture for centuries to come. As conclusion, the exploration of sexuality in the Middle Ages reveals a world far more nuanced and vibrant than the simplistic narratives of repression and austerity often depicted in popular culture. Beneath the austere exterior of religious edicts and legal prohibitions, medieval society was a place where desire found countless outlets. Whether in the chaste rituals of courtly love, the regulated spaces of urban brothels, or the secret, subversive practices hidden from public view. By delving into the complex interplay between law, religion, and personal passion, we have uncovered a history of sexuality that challenges our modern assumptions. The strict moral codes preached by the Church coexisted with a rich undercurrent of erotic expression, revealing the inherent contradictions of a society struggling to reconcile ideal with reality. From the clandestine encounters of adulterous lovers to the structured yet emotionally charged performances of courtly romance, medieval sexuality was a multifaceted phenomenon, one that continues to shape our understanding of desire, gender, and intimacy. The echoes of medieval practices can still be felt in the modern world, where debates over sexual freedom and the legacy of religious morality persist. If you found this exploration into medieval sexuality as captivating as we did, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to History Facts and Mysteries. Your support helps us continue to uncover and share the untold stories of our past.